Hi, this is my 8th lecture. In this, we'll be studying entity, attributes, and its types. When we talk about a database management system, when we talk about DBMS software or DBMS, we have ER diagrams along with this. So, what is ER diagrams? Entity, relationship, diagram. Whenever we talk about a database, entity relationship diagram plays an important role in this. So that we'll be studying in this lecture. So before we draw these ER diagrams, we need to understand what is an entity, what is a relationship, what is attributes and all. So in this class we'll be studying what is entity, attributes and its types. So first we'll see entity. What is an entity? The basic object that the ER model represents is an entity. Entity is a basic object which has an independent existence. You can also call it as entity has its own existence, independent existence. Entity doesn't depend on the other object. An entity may be an object with a physical existence, or it may be an object with a conceptual existence. What they're telling is entity may have a physical existence or a conceptual existence. Physical existence means a particular person, car, house and employee. All these are come under a physical existence, and conceptual existence which doesn't have a existence, like a company, a job or a university course. These all comes under conceptual existence. I hope you are clear with the definition. Entity is a real world object, we can say, which has an independent existence. It can be a physical existence or a conceptual existence. Example for entity is person, car, house, or a company, job, university, course, etc. are an example of entity. Here they have taken one example. Each entity has attributes. Here in this diagram or an example, they have taken both entity and an attribute. See here, the particular properties that describe it. Entity has its own attribute. For example, for a person, how do you describe a person? By his attributes, by his properties, like he has eyes, nose and hairs, etc. Like this, each entity has its own attributes. For example, they have taken employee entity. Employee entity may be described by the employee's name, age, address, salary and job. Here they have taken employee. Each employee 1, employee has the attribute name, address, age, phone number. These are the attributes of employee entity. And see here, C1 they have taken as a company. Company has its own attribute, company name, headquarters, where it resided, and who is the president of that company. These are the attributes of this company. Then what is this John Smith 2311? These are the value of an attribute. Whenever we are inserting a value in a table, we have employee table. Clear? Employee is an entity. It has name and address. Next we have age of an employee, and one more we have home phone. Like this we store the data, right? So these are the attributes. Now value we need to store, right? John Smith, 2311, age is 55 and phone number is 731 something. So this is how we store the data. I hope you all understood what is an entity, what is an attribute, and these are the value of an attribute. Next we have attribute. Attribute, the definition is attribute is a particular property that describes the entity. What is attribute? Attribute is a property which will describe an entity. Whichever entity we are considering in our database, every entity has its own attribute, right? So attribute is a property which will describe the entity is called as attribute. The attribute value that describe each entity become a major part of data stored in the database. See, attribute plays an again important role in a database. Without attribute you cannot describe only your entity. Employee entity may describe name, age, salary, job, etc. In this slide only we have seen what is an attribute, right? So we have different categories in it. First one is simple or atomic attribute, composite attribute, single valued attribute, multi-valued attribute, stored attribute, and derived attribute. See, this is an important concept we need to understand for your ER diagram, entity relationship diagram. To draw this diagram, you need to understand this concept very clearly. So the first one is simple or atomic attribute. This entity has a single atomic value for the attribute. Atomic attribute is an attribute that is not divisible, is called as atomic. For example, simple or atomic value or attribute is an attribute which cannot be divided further. Means it has a simple attribute. For example, you see here, student is an entity, register number, first name and gender. Here, first name they have not considered as a simple or atomic, because this first name can have, a single person can have multiple names, right? His original name, his pet names, etc. Register number, here we are considering this as a primary key. This I'll explain in the future classes. But as of now, you understand simple or atomic attribute should not be divided or divisible. For example, gender. Gender is an atomic value, means a single value which cannot be divisible. Gender we cannot divide, right? So example is gender. Next we have composite attribute. The attribute may be composed of several components, means it is an exact opposite of your simple or atomic attribute. Atomic which cannot be divisible, composite is divisible. A single attribute, we have an attribute that we are dividing further. The composite attribute can be divided into smaller sub-parts which represent the basic attribute. For example, they have taken address. See here, address is one attribute, right? Address can be further divided into smaller parts. Street address, city, state, zip code and all. Again, street address they have divided into street number, street name or apartment number like this. An attribute which can be divided into multiple parts is called as composite attributes. Next we have single valued versus multi-valued attributes. Single value is the same like a simple or atomic. Attribute has a single value is called as single value. You can take example as gender only. Gender has a single value, right? Next we have multi-valued attributes. What is multi-value? Which has multiple values for that attribute. Don't get confused between the composite and multi-valued attribute. Multi-value is which has multiple values in it. Composite is we are dividing a single attribute. See here, multi-value color of a car. Color can be anything, right? It can be red, blue, black, white, etc. But address, we are dividing into multiple parts. That is composite. I hope it is clear what is multi-valued and composite. So these two are different from each other. And how we are denoting the multi-valued attribute? By the flower brackets. Stored versus derived attribute. For a particular person entity, the value of an age can be determined from the current date or the value of the person birth date. Hence, the age is called as derived attribute and the date of birth is called as stored attribute. See here, we have two attributes, stored and derived attribute. Again, we have the attribute age and date of birth, right? By the date of birth attribute, you can easily calculate the age, right? If you get to know the date of birth of a person, you can easily identify the age of that person. So, here age is a derived attribute, where we are deriving this value from the date of birth attribute. So age is derived attribute and date of birth is stored attribute. Clear? Next we have null values. In some cases, a particular entity may not have an applicable value for an attribute. We have employee, we have some attribute names, and that particular employee doesn't have, for example, phone number. That employee doesn't have a phone number, so we keep it blank, right? It is called as null value. Or we can take employee has its own house, right? He doesn't have an apartment. When do you have apartment number? Whenever you are staying in an apartment building, then only you will get an apartment number. For example, this even employee is not staying in apartment, so he doesn't have apartment number only. We'll take one more example, apartment number. So we keep this blank because this even employee doesn't have an apartment number. So null values are the one which doesn't has the value in it, is called as null value. Complex attribute. We can represent the arbitrary nesting by grouping the components of composite attributes between the parentheses and the multivalued attributes with the flower brackets. See, what is complex attribute? Complex attribute is a mixture of both composite attribute and multivalued attribute. And composite we are representing in parenthesis, and this multivalued we are representing in brackets, flower brackets. Here they have given the example. I hope you all understood what is an entity, what is an attribute and its type. If you like this video, please like, share and subscribe. Thank you.